So we have readings in the margin, or marginal readings in the Masoretic writings. Even in antiquity, substitutions were made, at first only orally in public worship, later also in the form of marginal notes in private copies of readings other than those found in the text, as Frankel has shown in his Vorstudien. Even the Septuagint knew those readings and frequently adopted them. These variants have various origins. Some of them represent variants in ancient manuscripts and have, therefore, text-critical value. You see some of the writings here. Others arose from the necessity of replacing erroneous, difficult, irregular, provincial, archaic, unseemly, or cacophonous expressions by correct, simpler, current, appropriate, or euphonious readings. Euphonious, cacophony is like the words sound noisy and disturbing. Euphonious is harmonious, because Hebrew is more of a auditory language that's pleasing to the ear than English, for example, or the guttural Assyrian language, which the Lord spoke of in when Assyria invaded Israel, the northern kingdom. A third class may have been designed to call attention to some mystic meaning or homiletical lesson supposed to be embodied in the text. Fourth class, finally, and this very late, is due to variants found in the Talmudic literature. So they're trying to wade through the difficulties where history has shown people in generations ago mishandled the text of the Bible, the Old Testament, and they're trying to figure out how to fix it. These variants are a threefold character. 1. Words to be read. Xiii, for those written in the text. Kitab, so reading as in the services in synagogue versus reading the text on your own, quietly. Words to be read for those not written in the text. And 3, words written but not to be read. Page from a manuscript Bible of the 14th century containing Masoretic notes from the Bamberger collection in the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York. A certain school of Masoretes used for the term Xiii the synonymous term Siberin. The readings of that school are usually registered by the Masorah disapprovingly with the addition of unmatim, meaning that they are misleading. Very meticulous here, and there are a lot of people involved in this thing. That's why they have to have all these rules set up. To the Masoretes belongs also the credit of inventing and elaborating graphic signs to indicate the traditional pronunciation, syntactical construction, and cantillation of the biblical text when you read it for singing. Point 11. History of development. The history of the Masorah may be divided into 3 periods. The creative period, from its beginning to the introduction of vowel signs. The reproductive period, from the introduction of the vowel signs to the printing of the Masorah. And the critical period, from 1425 to the present time. These took years. The materials for the history of the first period are scattered remarks in the Talmudic and Midrashic literature, in the post-Talmudical treatises, which are named here, Masechet Sefer Torah and Masechet Sophirim, and in the Masoretic chain of tradition found in Ben Asher's work, Teduke, ha-Zeman, these are transliterations of the Hebrew, and elsewhere. So Masechet Sophirim is a work of unknown date by a Palestinian author. The first 5 chapters are slightly S-L-I-G-H-T-L-Y, T-L-Y, amplified reproduction of the earlier Masechet Sefer Torah, a compendium of rules to be observed by scribes in the preparation and writing of scriptural rolls. And they were elaborate, and they abided by them, obviously meticulously, and that's why you have such a good report on the Old Testament. So these rules are characterized as purely Masoretic. The third part, commencing at chapter 10, treats of ritualistic matter. While the work as a whole is perhaps not earlier than the beginning of the 9th century, in Masoretic portions probably go back to the 6th or 7th century. They've been working on it so long, and they're taking their time, making sure that they get everything right, because the Old Testament was in a mess there at that time. A comparison of this work with the Masoretic material found in the Talmudic literature shows that the lists of marginal readings have been systematically enlarged. A critical comparison has been instituted between parallel passages in Scripture. Rules are now given for the first time as to the unusual form which certain letters and words, of which the Talmud had taken special note, are to be written. If you keep it consistent, you're going to have a consistently transmitted Bible down through the ages. The stichometrical form in which the scriptural songs are to be arranged is described in fuller detail than it had been in the Talmud. It is also stated that in private copies the beginnings of verses used to be marked. Some readings in chapter 13, 1 mention also accents, but these readings are doubtful. In the chain of traditional quoted in Ben Asher, the earliest name is a certain Nakai, who is said to have emigrated under the persecutions of Tianius Rufus from Palestine to Babylonia, and spread Masoretic knowledge in the city of Nehardea. This would be about 140 of the Common Era, and the tradition containing 8 names would date around 340. In any case, we have this detailed paper, differences between Babylonia and Palestine. This is interesting. In the course of time, differences in the spelling and pronunciation had developed not only between the schools of Palestine and Babylonia, differences already noted in the 3rd century, but in the various seats of learning in each country. In Babylonia, the school of Sarah differed from that of Nehardea, and similar differences existed in the schools of Palestine, where the chief seat of learning in later times was the city of Tiberias. These differences must have become accentuated with the introduction of graphic signs for pronunciation and cantillation, singing psalms. At every locality, following the tradition of its school, had a standard codex embodying its readings. In this period, living tradition ceased, and the Masoretes, in preparing their codices, usually followed the one school or the other, examining, however, the standard codices of other schools and noting their differences. In the first half of the 10th century, Aaron ben Moses ben Asher of Tiberias and ben Naphtali, heads of 2 rival Masoretical schools, each wrote a standard codex of the Bible, embodying the traditions of their respective schools. Ben Asher was the last of a distinguished family of Masoretes, extending back to the latter half of the 8th century. In spite of the rivalry of Ben Naphtali and the opposition of Sadia Gaon, the most eminent representative of the Babylonian school of criticism, Ben Asher's codex became recognized as the standard of the Bible. Notwithstanding all this, this competition seems to improve people. If ever one person had all the control over the thing, there might have been a little bit less accuracy in transmission. Notwithstanding all of this, for reasons unknown, neither the printed text nor any manuscript which has been preserved is based entirely on Ben Asher. They are all eclectic. Aside from Ben Asher and Ben Naphtali, the names of several other Masoretes have come down, but perhaps with the exception of one, Phinehas, the head of the academy, who is supposed by modern scholars to have lived about 750. Neither their time, their place, nor their connection with the various schools is known. So Ben Asher and Ben Naphtali, the 2 rival authorities, Ben Asher and Ben Naphtali, practically brought the Masorah to a close. Very few additions were made by the later Masoretes, styled in the 13th and 14th centuries, Daimon, who revised the works of the copyists, added the vowels and accents, generally in fainter ink and with a finer pen, and frequently the Masorah Considerable influence on the development and spread of Masoretic literature was exercised during the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries by the Frankel German school of Josephus, Argoshim, his brother, Machir, Joseph B. Samuel, Bonfils, and so on, all these people. Competing yet working together. They all made Masoretic compilations or additions to the subject, which are all more or less frequently referred to in the marginal glosses of biblical codices and in the works of Hebrew grammarians. Notice they didn't try to have their own version independent of everybody else's, without all the other explanations of why they made one entry or another. Critical study. Jacob ibn Adonijah, having collated a vast number of manuscripts, systemized his material and arranged the Masorah in the second Bamberger edition of the Bible. Besides introducing the Masorah into the margin, he compiled at the close of his Bible a concordance of the Masoretic glosses, for which you could not find room in a marginal form, and added an elaborate introduction, the first treatise on the Masorah ever produced. In spite of its numerous errors, this excellent work has generally been acknowledged as the Textus Receptus of the Masorah. Next to Ibn Adonijah, the critical study of the Masorah has been more advanced by Elijah Levita, who published his famous, Masoret ha-Masoret in 1538. The Tiberius of the elder Buxtorf made Levita's researches accessible to Christian students. Walton's eighth Prolegomena is largely a reshuffle of the Tiberius. Levita compiled likewise a vast Masoretic concordance, Sefer ha-Zikaronot, which still lies in the National Library at Paris, unpublished. The study is indebted also to Armia B. Todres Levi, who as early as the 13th century wrote his Sefer Masoret Seyag la Torah, correct edition 1750, to Menahem de Lanzendo, who composed a treatise on the Masorah of the Pentateuch entitled Or Torah, and in particular to Jedediah Solomon of Norzi, whose Minḥat Shai contains valuable Masoretic notes based on a careful study of manuscripts. Mention must also be made of J.C. Wolfe, whose Bibliotheca Hebrea contains a treatise on the Masorah and a list of Masoretic authorities. For less known names, consult the bibliography at the website addressed above. In modern times, knowledge of the Masorah has been advanced by the following scholars: W. Heidenheim, A. Geiger, and so on, all of these people. And among Christian scholars are to be mentioned H. Kupfeld, Franz Delitzsch, and so on. A lot of these people involved. So, we have the Masorah to Targum Onkelos. In imitation of the Masorah to the Hebrew text, a similar work exists to the text of Targum Onkelos, first edited by A. Berliner, Leipzig, 1877, then by S. Laudner. According to Berliner's opinion, it must have been compiled about the end of the 9th or the beginning of the 10th century. So there you go. All these people contributing. And we have an examination, and we've already looked at a comparison between the Masoretic Bible and some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, especially the complete book of Isaiah. And we found very, very minor differences. So we have a preservation of more than 1,000 years from the Hebrew of the old original language to the new form Masoretic characters of the Bible, of the alphabet, and all this careful examination of the various manuscripts they work with to come up with the best they could to the original text of the Bible. And we looked at the one in Isaiah, Dead Sea Scroll discovery, and we find absolutely, with all this effort, you'd think all these people working together, often and competitive with one another, yet look what we have, how God has miraculously arranged it, that we have a Bible that we can trust. And you got the Old Testament scriptural passages were the Septuagint